Okay, I want us to take a minute to review the different types of angles that we have. Now let's remember what an angle has and what its vertex, what its parts are called. And so an angle has two rays. A ray, of course, has an end point, and then it can go forever in another direction. But here's what the two rays of an angle have, is they have the same endpoint. And the name of that endpoint, if you'll remember, is the vertex. So an angle has a vertex and two rays, and when we're measuring an angle, we're not measuring how long the rays are. They go on forever. But we're actually measuring how wide the angle is open. So we're measuring the degrees of the vertex. And a good way to remember what a degree is this. If we have a point and we go a full rotation around that point, we divide that into 360 equal parts. And each part is called a degree. So degrees really just means how many 360ths of the way have we gone around the angle, around the point. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at different kinds of angles and how to identify those. And most of this is going to be review from previous grades. So now what I want us to do is to identify, we're going to start with three very common kinds of angles. The first kind of angle we're going to look for are the right angles. And the right angles are some of the most important and most familiar. And we know that right angles are angles that equal exactly 90 degrees. If we think of a straight line as being 180 degrees from here to here, then 90 is exactly half of that. And most of you probably know that the way that we indicate 90 degrees is we actually show a 90-degree angle with a little square. In fact, when we square something up, that means we have a 90-degree angle. So what I'd like you to do on your paper is, just as I've written math in capital letters, write them as straight as possible on the side, I'd like you to write math that way on your paper, and then pause the video and find all the right angles you can find in these letters and label them with a box. Okay, I hope you've done that. There are quite a few right angles. If we wanted to find the first letter that has right angles is the T, and the T actually has two right angles. It has a right angle at this point and at this point. So I hope you've labeled your right angles there. And then also the H actually has four right angles. There's a right angle here and here and here and here. And those all have a measure of exactly 90 degrees. That's what makes them a right angle. The next angles I want us to look for, the acute angles. And acute angles have a measure of less than 90 degrees. And so if a 90-degree angle is like the corner of a square, then an acute angle is any angle where the line is actually smaller. And so I want you to pause the video then and look and see how many acute angles you can find on here. Okay, I hope you've taken the time to find that. Let's look. First of all, the M actually has three acute angles. This is an acute angle, and this is an acute angle, and this is an acute angle. And these are arcs that I'm drawing, and an arc is how we show an angle measure. We use the little square especially for right angles, but other angles have that arc. Now the A actually has three acute angles. This is an acute angle at the top, and even though these angles below are larger than the top angle, they're still less than 90. So these are acute angles. And so we actually see that there are 6 acute angles. Now the next kind of angle we're going to look for are going to be the obtuse angles. Obtuse angles, we can imagine that since acute angles are angles that are less than 90 degrees, obtuse angles are actually angles that are greater than 90 degrees. And so we have a right angle, and actually an obtuse angle is one where the angle is actually wider. Like this is an example of an obtuse angle. And if we want to look at for obtuse angles, there's not a lot in here, but we actually see that in the A, these two angles are obtuse angles. So that is what an obtuse angle looks like. Now there's actually one more kind you may not be familiar with. There are actually angles that are greater than 180 degrees, and those are going to be called reflex angles. Reflex angles are actually angles that are greater than 180 degrees. Now here's what that means. 180 degrees is the measure of a straight line. It's halfway of a circle to measure the angle. So if you have an acute or obtuse angle, like for example on this, what I actually have is an obtuse angle right here. But if I look at the other side of the angle, it's actually greater than 180 degrees. It's bent the wrong way, and that is actually called a reflex angle. And so if we wanted to find some reflex angles, here would be an example. This is a reflex angle right here at the M, and at the top of the A, this is a reflex angle. They're really the opposite side of an acute or an obtuse angle. And so those are the kinds of angles. We have right angles, which are 90 degrees. We have acute angles, which are less than 90. Obtuse angles are greater than 90 but less than 180, and reflex angles are greater than 180. And the one kind of angle I didn't mention, but we should actually be able to explain pretty easily to ourselves, is I didn't mention straight angles. But we actually also have straight angles. Okay, and a straight angle is exactly 180 degrees, and it's actually written just as a straight line, and we'll usually put a point where the vertex is, but a straight line has that measure. And so those are the different kinds of angles that we'll be talking about in the upcoming lessons.